I suppose anything's scary if it's pissed enough. Even worms. And in tonight's episode, these worms are really pissed. This is Go Eat Worms. Meet Todd Barstow, a boy absolutely obsessed with worms. So obsessed that the common man might ask a few questions about the boy's mental acuity. He reads comics like, Worm World, and he has a huge fish tank full of worms in his basement. And, of course, he's absolutely filled with random interesting facts about, well, worms. Essentially, he's one step above that one weird kid that was at everyone's elementary school. You know, the one who ate worms. He's exactly one step above that. Just one. We're first introduced to him in his basement as he's showing off his worm collection to his best friend Danny. We find out as his sister enters the basement that Todd is planning to do a little science experiment with the worms for the science fair. His sister thinks that's a gross and stupid idea, and that nothing is going to beat her amazing idea for an experiment.
What are you gonna do? Use dolls to act out a story from the X-Files?
Okay, that's an oddly specific example. Honestly sounds like a cool idea. I'd see it. Anyway, Reggie shows off her true science project, which is a bird. What is the experiment exactly? Well, apparently it's the life cycle of a robin. But just as Reggie reaches up towards her papier-mâché bird, it opens up its mouth and spews forth a flurry of creepy crawlies upon her head.
Must have been something it ate.
Alright, so Todd's a dick confirmed. Guess that's in tune with the book counterpart. For my sake, I hope the comparisons between this episode and the book are fairly limited. Reggie is, of course, pissed about Todd wrecking the robin, so she threatens revenge before getting spooked about more worms on the banister. As Todd and Danny celebrate their prank success, the worms from the nearby tub rise from the dirt like little periscopes and watch as they cheer on. Next day, Danny and Todd are still talking about their awesome prank they pulled the other day. Children are assholes. And of course, Todd is still going on and on about how cool worms are. Okay, for God's sakes, dude, you need a better hobby. Get into anime or something. I mean, it's still cringe, but it's a lot better than obsessing over worms. The two friends sit down in the cafeteria and swap lunches. As Todd continues to ramble on about his worms, his friend opens the container of spaghetti and unfortunately almost takes a bite, full of worm. We take a look at the spaghetti to see all the creepy crawlies crawling among the noodles.
I didn't do it! Sure, that's why you wanted to swap? You and your stupid jokes! Why would I? You're my best friend! Not anymore. Danny, I didn't do it!
Wow, Danny doesn't take any shit. I mean, they really went from best friends to mortal enemies fast. Todd thinks this is the work of Reggie and shrugs it off. At least he gets to keep his friend's sandwich. I guess Danny isn't eating any lunch today. Meanwhile, we're introduced to Todd's mother as she enters his room for the first time in a while.
No wonder I don't get in here more often. It's gotten worse.
Lady, you bought him this stuff. I mean, probably. So I wouldn't be so surprised. Pay more attention to your kid, ma'am. My God. Todd comes from up behind his mother and spooks her, thinking it was his sister Reggie. Now, this mother character, I have to give her an award on this show for probably being the worst acted mother in any media I've ever seen. I mean, my God.
I like to see you getting your protein, but that's going a bit far. If you were my client, I'd tell you to plead insanity. Crazy about worms.
I just think they're cool, that's all.
She's either not trying, or the character is just utterly broken from her son's worm obsession. Seriously, who gets obsessed with worms? Is that a thing? Later that night, Todd gets another visit from the creepy crawlies as he finds them slithering around in his bed. And I mean, they are everywhere. They get on his face, on his legs, and presumably in even worse spots that we won't even mention. I do have to say that the music in this episode is really great. I love the worm thing we got going on, and it really adds to the scene. Even though the scene itself isn't particularly scary, I think they're trying to go for gross. And while, yeah, that is pretty gross, I have seen far worse. Even in kids' shows. Hell, even in this show, now that I think about it. Yeah, I think Stay Out of the Basement really tops this in terms of worms in the bed aesthetic, because they went above and beyond for that one. Anyway, eventually Todd wakes up and screams, calling his mother into the room. She sees this and is like, "What the fuck are you doing, Todd? My God, this obsession has gone a little too far, buddy." He tries telling his mom that his sister did this, but she's not even home, so it couldn't have even been her. Fed up with his crap, she tells him to clean up the worms and to go back to bed. The next day, Todd goes over to Danny and tries to make up for the prank the other day. Things are easily patched up with Danny, it seems, but Todd still has to collect worms by himself from the creekside. On his way there, he runs into his sister and her dorky friend Beth. Todd confronts them about turning his worms against him, but they just make fun of him and continue on their way.
Worms on the brain! Worms on the brain! Worms on the brain!
Catchy tune there. Too bad the episode's about worms, and, well, you have yet to convince me that worms are scary, Goosebumps. I mean, seriously. Todd heads back to the basement to add more worms to his collection. They watch him as he fiddles around the basement, and as Todd leaves, the worm tank begins to pulsate, as if there's something more dangerous within the bowels of the tank. Todd heads into the rain at night to collect more juicy night crawlers. I'm beginning to think this kid really does have worms on the brain.
Worms on the brain!
He unfortunately makes a wrong step and finds himself falling into a dark, extenuous cavern deep underground. He screams as a strange quaking sensation vibrates the cave, and then suddenly stops. Something is clearly in this place with him. On the cave wall, he finds a message spelled out, just for him.
Todd, we will make you squirm.
He then finds himself standing in a huge pool of pulsating worms pulling down on him. He manages to escape, but not before running into a huge monster worm that gives chase. Todd thankfully manages to make it out of this cave, but not before the big worm grabs him, pulls on him, but then suddenly retreats below ground as Regina comes out of the woods with Beth holding the robin. I guess it turns out that the robin scared off the worms because, well, bird. Todd jumps up and thanks them as they just stare at him like a demented lunatic, and, well, let's be fair, he probably is. He enjoys torturing animals. That's a part of the book and kind of a part of this episode. And, well, we all know how serial killers start.
I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
The next day, we see Todd finally getting over his worm obsession as he cleans out the basement of worms and gets rid of all of his worm-related paraphernalia. He decides to move on to a new obsession: fishing. Or rather, fish. He and Danny head over to the lake to catch some new fish for their science experiment. Todd talks about doing all sorts of inhumane experiments towards them, and Danny finds that a bit odd. Okay, literally, Todd is a psychopath. He's a serial killer. He hasn't learned anything. But thankfully, Todd gets his comeuppance in the most ridiculous way you could possibly think of.
I'm gonna have a bite of your sandwich, okay? My sandwich? I thought it was your sandwich. Todd!
Jeez, I guess fish don't like to get fucked around with either.
Danny, help! They've got
How is he talking underwater?
You guys look like nice fish. Please let me go. Thanks. What? You're gonna make me swim back?
Okay, seriously, just drown this kid, please. And that was Go Eat Worms. It was goofy, gross, and a little stupid, but not without its charm. I love the music this episode has. Unlike a lot of the other episodes that take place in the suburbs, this episode really sets a great tone and atmosphere. Even if it is an episode about worms, and the worms themselves aren't really as scary as a whole. Also, all the characters, with maybe the exception of Danny, and believe me, that's a big maybe, are pretty annoying. Unfortunately, overall, this is kind of a meh episode to me. I will give it props for being a little better than the book version, as the book version spent way too much time around the science fair plot and another kid doing a worm project, and that was just boring. This episode gets right to the point, and I would argue it might get there a little too fast, as it feels like there wasn't enough build-up for the giant worm in order to be climactic. In fact, there isn't really much of a climax. The worm appears, the worm grabs him, and then just kind of disappears, and Todd decides he doesn't like worms anymore. Big whoop. It kind of felt a little, it felt like there needed to be a little bit more there. The few moments we do see, it's not too scary. I give this episode a 5 out of 10. It's as generic as you can get, but it's got a good atmosphere, and it sets the music up with some great shots of the worms being creepy, but at the end, the worms themselves are just not really scary and don't really pose a huge overall threat. And that ending, oh god, that ending was just so campy and stupid, I verbally groaned when watching it. And, I wouldn't recommend this episode, but I wouldn't discount it either. It's just okay. And that was tonight's episode. I hope you all enjoyed, and remember that if you're going out tonight, remember to not offend any animals. Don't hurt them, don't inconvenience them, even slightly, because if you do, they may be coming after you. So keep that in mind, and stay tuned for future Goosebumps episodes. And most importantly, remember to have a scary day.